Video 35, The Bride of the Light. Well, I didn't see that coming. President Maduro of Venezuela taken captive by Trump and put on trial in the US. How does this make sense? The pretext here is that Venezuela was flooding the USA with immigrants and drugs. As an oil economy, Venezuela was going well in the 1970s until oil prices collapsed in the 1980s. Recovering in the 1990s, it then fell into chaos in the 2010s, especially after the assassination of President Chavez, and his replacement, Maduro, oversaw an exodus of 7.9 million according to UN figures. However, perhaps coincidentally, Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves and is selling to both Russia and China, yet produces just 1% of oil globally. So the US having control of Venezuelan oil would enable them to provide cheap energy to the West instead, which would help to compensate for the way the Russian invasion of Ukraine caused energy prices to rise. Sources differ greatly on the exact amounts, but it is the generally accepted view that these countries have the largest oil reserves by a very long way. Venezuela with around 300 billion barrels, Saudi Arabia 280 billion, Iran 208, Iraq 150, United Arab Emirates 110, Kuwait 100, Russia 80, Libya 50, US 68, Nigeria 37, Kazakhstan 30, China 28, Qatar 25, Brazil 15, Algeria 12. And there are several other countries with oil reserves in the billions, but as you can see, these are by far the largest. So is it another spin-off war, or is it just the problem of war in general? It seems that it is part of the situation at large, as Trump feels justified in denying resources to the other side. And we can see that the element of the way the situation we're in today has evolved out of the Cold War, during which this sort of behaviour was standard practice. But now, how are we supposed to understand this in terms of the new working relationship between the superpowers? Well, it seems that the war in Ukraine is one dynamic, the rise of the centre ground another. The need to create stability in the East following the problem of Western imperialism and Middle Eastern terrorism, hence the need for reorganisation in the West, follows, with that being the kind of problem really that we're having over here. I'm in the UK and we're very close to America politically, in fact probably closer than anyone else, because the historical evolution of nations. So probably not really hearing nearly as much from the EU now as we were when Brussels was the main centre of political growth and the rise of human rights. And I think really it just got too powerful, and it just started to design the laws in each country, and the UK just wanted to have its own ability to design its own laws. So anyway, the West has had to allow the free market economy, and this was really the difference between the two sides in the Cold War, that the West had to allow unbridled freedoms to its citizens in order to accuse communism of authoritarianism and the state control of resources, political ideology, and people's lives in general. So we can see there is a difference in the kind of blocks which exist politically. There's various ways in which they break down, like the West breaks down into NATO, and it also breaks down into South and West America and Europe, and it also breaks down to the EU and this part of the Anglosphere. So each country's got its own complex set of treaties which it manages through diplomatic relations, and that's kind of what central governments are doing at the moment, is managing the total amount of information that the government has on its hands every day. So have people in the West to a large extent been influenced to ignoring the rise of Chinese communism, say, and people who lived during the Cold War now own most of the Western media, have been encouraging people to really just to get on with their own jobs. So while the Western world feels kind of threatened by ideas which do not stem from its capitalist methods, and this is still something which is going on because of the Cold War, and it's not just a product of imperialism, but that imperialism caused the Cold War. So the rise of new ideas has been occurring globally, and now this rather convoluted behaviour from the USA is a result of decades of issues which have been left unaddressed. in particular the taxing of corporations and billionaires who have masterminded the continuation of capitalism and government policy. And perhaps it's the huge separation between China and the US across the Pacific Ocean, which causes a kind of delay in terms of, or at least a kind of staggering of the order of events in terms of how one country responds to another, as China's really across a whole series of land masses as far as the USA is concerned on the eastern side, and then on the western side there's this massive sea, and then there's nothing, and then there's Japan, and then there's China and Russia all at the same time, really. So will the world system retrospectively be able to justify working in this way? I think it will, because of the way that the action is just kind of not being taken really on kind of everyday issues across so many countries. And it's all really because of the way the structure of global societies evolved through the postmodern age. So we can cite historical precedents, and we can explain how the situation has led to the one that we're in now, which is basically what politicians have to do in order to justify themselves. So on the other hand, though, they are managing at the same time the same old pattern events which have evolved over the whole of time, with today's US president being the eventual successor of George Washington, just like the King of England has inherited the estates of William the Conqueror, and the leaders of China are the successors of its historical emperors. There is a period of, it seems, involving East and West, a period of shared economic growth in which the East and West are getting along, then a conflict of interest, then the fallout, the breaking point and war, after which a period of complex change occurs globally, territories change hands, and the state of society is reevaluated, followed by the introduction of new ideas according to the way people's values have changed in different places, and people think that they're creating these new ideas themselves. So here we can see the seeds of the next war sown in terms of the way people perpetuate their differences. So what happens now people are starting to see the whole picture? Do we have a new type of reformation, or revolution, or some other form of conflict? Is it just that all types of opposition which emerge to the system now have become defined as terrorism? That's why I'm saying people need to be very careful in some cases about how they perceive the way the whole ideas process evolves, in the way they act, speak, and think. Even though people can still think and talk about whatever they want, there's still freedom of speech. It's just that there may not be freedom after speech in some cases. But I suspect the Islamic Revolution will produce even more surprises, just like the French and Bolshevik Revolution brought complete global change. And even though people cannot see over the event horizon right now in terms of what will occur, this is what enables governments to plan and create change internally by managing populations, using analytics and intelligence agencies. Perhaps this is what will happen. The event horizon will become more of a level playing field. The more the world globalizes and people start living in the now, as the politics of nations become more integrated, like a volcano exploding. Like right now the whole process is lumpy, badly coordinated and erratic. Maybe it will run more smoothly after the turmoil. After all, what are government analysts doing if they're not solving the problem? The problem now seems to be the size of the issues in geopolitics getting bigger the more economic development occurs. So is it a case of the brighter the light, the darker the shadow? That is, the more globalized and wealthy the world gets, the bigger its issues become. This is why I'm calling for change now in terms of learning to understand the world order, as it is both possible for us to blow the world up or use the internet to understand ourselves and each other. So can we learn to resolve our issues before they blow up into crises? Please think about the people and ecosystems which are dying because of the problems that we have now, and just try to make an effort. Do you really think governments would get away with murder if people saw it for what it was? Wouldn't you rather do that than what happens when we don't? Should we even need somebody to say this? The really scary part is that there are people who think that we simply cannot control ourselves and need religion and politics to guide us. But World War I was the war to end all wars, and it happened over 100 years ago. Religions can only manage populations who subscribe to them, and this is a world order issue. Wouldn't you rather have the ability to weigh up both sides of an argument and decide with who you agree or disagree? Surely the difference between modern humans and the species we evolved out of is that we can choose who we want to be. I mean, everyone can see where they are in terms of what they're a part of, whether it's the school system or college or university, the warehouse workers, the military contractors, scientists or politicians. Secret societies and specialized agencies seem to have their own rules, which members must follow at the exclusion of all else, as they have their own unique mission and the freedom to achieve their objectives in their own way. But everyone knows what their institution does and what its expectations are from its members, except possibly the Freemasons. So we can see all the situations that we're in are evolving over time. As we can see where we are on the map, it's just a case of learning to read the map properly, really, in terms of seeing where everyone else is as well. While it may seem like an easier life staying ignorant, isn't life easier for a sighted person than a blind one? It's just that we cannot achieve this if we do not understand how the world has evolved out of history. But there is really only one model that we have to learn, and it's because some of the deeper lines of thinking which have evolved out of earlier periods are still in play. So back to the world picture. In the last video I was saying about wanting to create a society everyone can live in. So are we doing that? It seems people must at least be able to understand our present situation. Iran just recently said it was at war with America. And how closely did this precede the US taking control of Venezuela in terms of the interconnected relationship between nations? It seems certain countries are very closely connected through their intelligence agencies like the Five Eyes community of UK, US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Then there's BRICS, there's NATO, the African nations, South America. But then the big five on the UN Security Council are connected in a different way, in a much more formal sense, as they're part of one of the core components of the UN system. And this creates an additional level of importance. But is one person really more important than another? If equality in terms of human rights is already established in law, then why should the world system seek a future which perpetuates social inequality from birth on the grounds of nationality, race or religion? Currently, we can see Russia and the US are extremely active in terms of the world order affairs. So what are France, the UK and China even doing except keeping the world stable by deliberately doing nothing? There must be someone to keep the progress going across the world as humanity is waking up to this new age. And what we really want to do is make it a good one and at least reduce the role of the superpowers to meddling, rather than dictating the way progress is created. We can see the way ideas are stylized to extremes by behaviors which only manifest in certain places, people and nations, which governments do acknowledge and can even grant special rights towards certain groups like the monarchy, Freemasons or charities, religions, banks. There's all kind of things happening in the West at the moment. There's some big mysteries about certain institutions which keep coming up, like the Vatican, the Freemasons, the monarchy. It's a big mystery really what's actually going on in there, and it just seems to be a big set of power alliances, and people are kind of wondering really where people's actual society's going in the kind of struggle that's emerged against socialism because of the way the Cold War occurred. And you know, so if everybody's going to be antisocial, then what sort of society are we going to have? And then the communists are going to be super sociable and super collectively minded. So it just seems to be divided, and perhaps the question is really, how do we bring balance to a situation when many people don't understand the way in which it's evolving? So the thing is that we know that revolutionary Iran used fundamentalist Islam to keep its population under control, which to many people seems like a crazy and pointless idea. But in terms of the big picture, it seems to make sense according to the juxtaposition of political ideologies involving Russia, China and India and the East in general, of which the divide in the Middle East itself is a part. And perhaps we could say it's simply because Saudi Arabia was being ultra-conservative that the Middle East became divided between that and its own revolutionary faction, because of the way it sought to create a bloc of nations which were non-aligned with the superpowers. Yet the issue of the Cold War divide still ran through global society as a whole. And so it divided the region. The region was divided by its own politics, but then it was divided in a particular way by global politics. And then this particular way has become revolutionary Iran. So hence it all makes sense in terms of, according to the structure of the relationship between NATO and BRICS, as each side responds to the other, if every move they make is an equal counterbalancing move, And what happened to Afghanistan's culture as well has been a product of the world order in the sense of having to resist both Russia and the US. There is no one side they can take, there's no corner they can really fight from. And in this case, their culture has simply collapsed and gone underground. Russia's belief in the sacrifice of its own people continues, but it would appear logical that protecting their well being would emerge as the new core strategy as Russia moves towards defending its sovereignty after the war in Ukraine. US belief in individual freedoms also persists, despite the issue of there being something of American empire. The UK obsession with the monarchy seems to have arisen out of the need to create stable progress in the West, as communism threatened to provide an alternative, but however also led to the view that only their own aristocracy can understand the world order and all the other people in the world just simply don't have a clue. But things are changing as France, for example, has, since its revolution, been concerned with equal rights and citizenship, and also the Scandinavian countries, Switzerland, Italy, and Greece. There are certain places in the world which are driving change in terms of creating new ideas other countries can use, but people must work out for themselves how to convert these into solutions for themselves, or officially state-managed change will have to be the solution. While the state can use the education system to influence the direction change should occur in, it takes much longer than if people can work things out for themselves. The problem is that when countries can't create the sort of change that they need, like in Venezuela, and the same thing with ICE and the recent murder of Renee and Nicole Good, as the Western neoliberal social model is struggling with its own state of organisation and many people are left out of the political process. Henceforth, there is also a massive abuse of power which occurs as a reaction to all the protests and social movements which rise, like it did with Black Lives Matter, and very few of these have been communist backed, while many are grassroots community affairs. The ICE agent who fired into the vehicle was trying to obstruct her as she was trying to flee the scene, as he believed he had the authority over her vehicle. The issue here being that some people outside of official law enforcement officers are trying to create a type of authority whereby the state is allowed to kill its citizens, not just in order to defend itself, as in a war, but just because they believe that anybody appointed by the state should have the right to give commands to people at large with no regard for the processes which are required by law. Trump said his public use of Trump said publicly his use of military force is only limited by his own morality, reasserting that the US is the land of the free, but also disregarding the way procedures must surely have evolved since the time of the Wild West. But it's also part of something bigger, and most people don't seem to realise that it's governments putting out huge amounts of what appears to be purely fictitious propaganda, saying it's all under control and people only need to perform the roles which are assigned to them, while the educated ones higher up in the hierarchy solve the problem of how to move the situation forward. So what is justice in these situations if people are not educated enough to handle the issues involved before they get caught up in an escalating situation in which both sides are attempting to seize control? Clearly, the incident involving ICE recently was an outright murder, but then the government's going to cover it up and say, well, he was just trying to do his job. And I think people are going to say, well, why is he trying to do his job in that way? So obviously, I guess there's going to be reforms after the protest, but then again, more of the same. People are addicted to crisis and they're just following the world from one to the next. This is why I'm saying to people in the West, don't get caught up in the tail end of imperialism, because there's no future to it. The more people try to recreate the nostalgia of days gone by, will eventually find that the world changes over time. And certainly a lot of these authoritarians now are trying to do that, and they're trying to bring back the days of imperialism and say, oh, well, that's what we're missing now. But to another extent, it's part of the response to China, the rise of China, Chinese communism, and communism in general, in the sense that the West is going to end up with some kind of opposite thing. If it's not fascism, then it's going to be neo-fascism or something like that, which is going to be somewhere in the system saying we've got to do this, we've got to do that. We can't avoid it, and other people are saying no, outright rejection. We're not going to do that at all. And I think this is just going to make them worse. It's going to make them more determined to sabotage processes and politics in the belief, and also form their organizations because they believe that society at large is not taking action in ways that it has to. And communism's going to keep on making gains as people refuse to talk about really what's happening. And I mean, I think what people in the West needs really is a way of finding their own sense of self-discipline and routine, and do things like drink plenty of water and avoid junk foods, fizzy drinks, and large quantities of alcohol and drugs. The fear of taking action and the not having confidence to think for yourself means the type of people who are getting promoted are just really compliant and make senior management feel comfortable, and they're not creating new ideas, adding to the sense of social stagflation. Because there's no more empire anymore to tell people how to think and behave. No one Judeo-Christian, church-driven Christian country ideology because of the equality of religion, the multiple paradigms, as if we weren't always the multiple denominations of the church and other religions involved in global affairs. But that's why the particular branches of Christianity have always been so keen in the past to take control of particular territories. So some people join far-right organizations just to make life simple for themselves and give them a set of rules, and the intelligent ones learn how to come out of the indecision that they're in. Many people are looking for a new sense of structure, but what if things they join don't give the ability to create one and instead start feeding the far right and even race hate propaganda? This is also something which is happening to people that perhaps don't understand what they got involved in. And obviously this is the big picture, that's what they need to see, and then they can choose what they believe in, because I don't have the right to tell them what they should believe. And I can see that there's going to be issues around the world, but the best thing we can do really is have it all out and discuss the big model. Obviously the educated way is the best way, it's just that not everyone can get their hands on it. The issue has been resolved to a certain extent over time, but people are still having wars over which religious worldview should govern a population due to the lack of education, so people need to know that they can connect with the big picture and work out for themselves. Then they can speak the language of the educated by identifying what's happening, assessing the different perspectives, and talking in terms of the four-dimensional model about the issues with where we're going over time. And that's the real difference between enslavement and freedom. This is a better way than wasting energy on the protests which erupt because of the crises which we have allowed to develop, as that is when the people who are out to make trouble for society gain power and influence, until it becomes socially acceptable for people at large to be incited by deliberate strategies which have been set in place to create a reaction, leading to increases in security and ultimately fascism, as it becomes commonplace for certain people to become involved in the belief that the state needs to defend itself using violence, and thus funding for police and surveillance technology increase, laws to limit people's civil rights are brought in and control freedom of speech. And Nazism is only one step away from here, and it's logical by extension that if violence is inherent in the world system, nations need to fight wars in order to survive. This is why people on social media are reminding the world of George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984, which was about a government where the Ministry of Truth only told lies. Perma-war was a policy which kept the population in constant crisis and subservient to its masters, controlling people's thought and behaviour at large. Though extreme policing exists, it still wasn't enough. Arrests, detainment, and even prison sentences with rehabilitation programs. It's about living under an occupation rather than a government. I was watching a short video somebody made on the level of organisation now in China, in which industries are encouraged to cluster. Shenzhen, for example, has become synonymous with consumer electronics, Hefei with home appliances, Zhongshan with lighting products. This keeps supply lines together and makes infrastructure more efficient, and surely the implications for this in the West, with its industries spread out over very large distances, due to the freedom for the free market economy to develop in its own way. And so the idea of more organised methods are fundamentally challenging for the West. Chaos erupts due to the conflict with its traditional idea of progress, meaning as the West needs to end imperialism, so some people just start finding more uses for it. But reform to our methods always occurs anyway, which makes them more appropriate for the times we live in. The thing is that there is enough information on the internet for people to understand everything. So it would help if governments could just move towards that and help them to understand the situation. Regardless of political persuasion, this is what everyone has in common. And we would all be better off if governments would stop pretending they're not doing things which are really obvious, like saying anything to win an election and then doing whatever they want when they're in power. Then perhaps all the prejudice and divisions in society would not matter so much. The need is there. So what is it going to be? I know people want results. So here's another thing which I found which helps. Learning how to use IQ scores to see where we are in terms of learning. And at first it's difficult to see what to learn, which is where you find all the people with a low IQ stuck on trying to work out what they're supposed to be doing. In principle, it works a bit like the NVQ system, but it's more of a constant curve instead of levels. So what it teaches us is how to see ourselves at a unique point in time rather than a stage that we have to pass through. And so it's okay to be wherever you are. There are various tests online with scores ranging from a relative low score of 70 to a high IQ of genius level 150 and above. It is said that the highest score anyone can achieve is 163, but I think that if we understand the system, then we need to periodically redefine it according to how the world develops. This is, for example, in the ancient world, because how much there was there for people to actually learn. In the Middle Ages, how much information was there actually in existence? There's not really very much. I mean, people, perhaps in the centres of learning in the universities, there was quite a bit, but in the countryside, I mean, people weren't even literate. Not as much as there is now anyway. So of course, the level that IQs can reach must increase over time rather than being one standard definition. For example, people with a low IQ are more likely to be loyal to a company or stick with a job regardless, or support a government regardless of their achievements. 100 apparently is a good average score and represents an understanding of society in terms of the way people are organised into nations, or of the groups that they're in at the time. Then there are skilled workers with, say, 110 who understand specialised processes, and they get into a more intense form of discussion, so this kind of increases their intelligence. And, just like sprinting would improve your running ability. There's talented musicians and artists on, say, 120 who do this in a group. And then the kind of elites are kind of the 130s, who are people who are basically like the CEOs and the political leaders who connect with the global picture but still follow doctrines. So, maybe they haven't got the morality, but they have the ability to do the jobs which need doing. So geniuses can be really starts at about 140 or above, because after the elite level, then you get into questioning the world order and the whole ideas process, really, and the ideas that govern society itself. And then you start sort of looking at how, maybe above 150, then you're sort of discussing how society creates new ideas according to the history of that process. But perhaps somewhat indiscriminately, maybe the 140s are kind of just having got there, they just want to be the greatest. They want to be like Genghis Khan or Trump, and they just want to expand themselves, really, I suppose, as much as they can, really, in relation to the sort of justified maybe by the problem of the world order as a whole. So anyway, it's good that we have people who are not afraid of the establishment and willing to point out something new, because it does actually give the people higher up a bit more ability to, a bit more material to review and to actually create new ideas out of which become the way that societies actually move forward. Then there is the establishment, which is concerned with managing the way the world moves forward. And these people are the 160 or above, and these are the ones that may not necessarily want to be famous, but are concerned with humanity as a whole. And there's a lot of people in the UN like that. So don't discount the views of people because they do not appear to be well educated, just because we can see how to achieve higher levels of consciousness through levels of study and activity. And this should create an increase in the ability to handle other people and encounter different types of people along the way. And you will get the hang of you will get the hang of rating yourself as you go if you seek to improve, but not if you stay where you are. If you just want to stay where you are and take the money for keeping quiet, then you're not going to grow and you're not going to change and the people that do actually get on with life, they are. So don't be afraid for promotion to happen. Just move forward and take the responsibility. If you're nervous about what might be wrong with you, there are other tests like the Briggs-Myers personality types, which help us feel at ease with ourselves and help improve how we interact with others. So don't regard IQ as being something which is designed to be limiting or determined at birth, but instead see it as a tool for self-development and understanding others. So here it is, the first look at the dynamics which are appearing. In the next video, I'll be looking at how events play out and more things that I've missed previously, so I can become more informed and better able to function in the present. In the meantime, use the algorithm of how the world has evolved out of history to read other algorithms which are around today